whether there will be relapses at a later stage for CNS, whether we will have more resistant clones, what will be the role of other NGS, whether we should use radiation, chemotherapy, and then osimertinib or directly use osimertinib. So there are many questions which are still unanswered, but what we see is a very, very interesting and overwhelming kind of results from Adura, and we welcome this kind of results. We should look at future being bright for this kind of patients. Thank you.
Thank you, Manish. It was very crisp and clear, and it was. I hope this drug osimertinib can create a great impact in the treatment of lung cancer. We're not going to take any questions for you in view of the shortage of time. I now request Dr. Sarjana Dutt, who is the director in Onquest in R&D department, to present her presentation.
Good evening, everyone. I take this opportunity to thank ISO and AstraZeneca for inviting me here today. Is my screen visible?
Yeah. Not in screen. I mean, you are still visible.
Okay. So...
There you are, madam.
Okay now? Oh,
yeah.
Great. Thank you. So I would be talking about biomarker testing in early stage lung cancer today. And during the flow of my talk, I would be touching upon these topics, that which are the important biomarkers to test in early stage non-small cell lung cancer, which are the specimen to be used, what are the pre-analytical variables to take care of, which are the technologies and the assay systems available with their pros and cons and troubleshooting, and what ought to be the correct reporting format for the laboratories. So the last decade or so has really been very exciting for those of us working in the field of lung cancer or laboratory diagnostics, because we have, so far as the lung cancer is concerned, we have moved from a purely histology-based subtyping to molecular subtyping basis. What are the biomarkers which are showing mutations or overexpressions? And this is important not only to know
Dr.
the genetic...
Sajjana,
Yes, please.
Your slides are not moving, and can you please put in presentation mode? Slides are not moving.
Oh, okay. So it is in presentation mode, Shrikant. I wonder why. So let me... what about now?
Now it's moved. Now we are in slide.
Now it's moved.
Okay. So...
full slide mode.
You'll have to make it on the view mode.
It is so in my PC. It's showing as in, full view mode in my PC. So I do not really know where the issue is.
Can you reshare it? Stop sharing and reshare it.
Okay, let me try that. Which is the slide being shown in your screen right now? Does it say non-small cell lung cancer has evolved into a disease classified? Is that what you see? Shrikant?
Yes, it is.
Yeah? All right, great. So what I was mentioning earlier was that so far as non-small cell lung cancer is concerned, we've moved from diagnostically focusing on the histology-based subtyping to molecular subtyping to know in terms of what are the genetic drivers which are causing the tumor to grow. And it is important not only in terms of the academic knowledge, but also because the further management of patients now is completely based upon which are the genetic drivers which are present in the given tumor, whether the patient is EGFR mutation positive, or is there a ALK rearrangement, or ROS and PDL1, so on and so forth. So far as early stage lung cancer is concerned, one of the most important genetic biomarkers is EGFR. And in India, like, we see patients in about 30 to 36% of the patients, we see EGFR mutations to be positive. Gotten stuck. Okay, has it moved to the next slide, which shows the tyrosine kinase domain of the EGFR? Is that slide visible?
No, ma'am, it's not visible. It's still in the NSCLC, has evolved into a disease classifier.
Oh my good Lord. I don't really know what the issue here is. Because what I'm able to see is, like, 2 slides beyond that. I do not really know what is causing this issue.
See, now we can see the EGFR mutation in NSCLC.
Okay. So probably there is some sort of a time lag. What I'll do is I'll keep prompting and asking if the slide has moved on or not. Thank you so much for helping me out. The most important mutations to focus on in EGFR are those which are present in the tyrosine kinase domain, namely from exons 18 to 21. And within this tyrosine kinase domain, we have mutations which are activating, which primarily means the presence of these mutations would have the patient respond to EGFR TKIs, and those such as the T790M, which are the non-activating mutations. So I'm moving on to the next slide. And what we have also seen, and this is a well-documented fact, that different populations across the globe show different percentages or different incidence rates of the EGFR mutations, starting right from 10 to 12%, which is seen in the US or in the Caucasian race, and about 30 to 40% amongst the Indians, to a high of more than 50% in the far Orientals, in Philippines, Taiwan, so on and so forth. I'm now coming and talking about what are the specimens to be used and what is the histopathology which is important for EGFR testing. So a biomarker testing should be performed on all cases which even have a little bit of adenocarcinoma component. What this means is we'll not be talking about pure adenocarcinoma, but even samples which either have a mixed histology or which is a mix of adeno and squamous cell carcinoma. By and large, IHC testing is not required to proceed forth for biomarker testing. However, if the morphology is so poor that one cannot really delineate whether an adenocarcinoma component is present, then it is suggested that probably just 2 IHC markers may be used, either TTF1 or napsin, to rule in favor of adenocarcinoma, or P40 or P63 to rule in favor of squamous cell carcinoma. However, just to reiterate, even if there is a little bit of adenocarcinoma component, one must go ahead with the biomarker testing. Further, a question that sometimes we get asked is that what is the tumor sample that can be used? Does it need to be a resected sample or a CT-guided FNAC, or can pleural fusion or cytology samples also be used? So the answer is that all of these samples can be used. However, it is important to ensure the presence of tumor cells in the sample. Also, it is important to know and remember that when one is using a cytology sample, when the percentage of tumor cells tends to be lower, and hence the choice of the technology becomes important. The analytical sensitivity of the technique of the assay system that we use must be high enough to ensure that we get a clear positive or a clear negative answer, even in samples such as those of cytology. The specimen type and the yield, as I mentioned, is important. Having ensured that any of the methodologies can be used, a resected tumor sample or an endobronchial biopsy, a transbronchial biopsy, or using an image-guided TTNA are all acceptable validated methods for taking out the tumor sample for further diagnostic workup. The tumor content, again, sometimes, especially so as I mentioned, sometimes in cytology samples, even in the CT-guided biopsy samples, sometimes the overall tumor content is lower. In those cases, it falls onto the laboratory to ensure to do a macro or a manual dissection for tumor cell enrichment, which is what we typically do. If the tumor cell content of the sample is more than 30%, then it is good enough to proceed with directly for testing. Otherwise, we take out the tissue sections on slide and do a macro dissection for tumor cell enrichment. As this is something that I have already touched upon earlier, that cytology again is an acceptable sample for the pre-analytical considerations are very, very important because tissue really is the issue so far as biomarker testing is concerned. For EGFR testing and for all other biomarker testing for non-small cell lung cancer, the tumor sample must be fixed in 10% neutral buffered formalin. And the sample must be put inside the formalin as soon as it is resected out. Boyne's fluid or other fixatives are not acceptable solutions for sample fixation. Also, if one has to do FISH staining for any of the other biomarkers, then it is important to ensure that the biopsy cores are not stained with mucin during tissue processing. If at all, it is important to stain the tissue just so as to ensure that it doesn't get lost during the long processing procedure, then tomato red is a good alternate which can be used. The fixation time again depends upon what is the nature of the sample that we are dealing with. If it is a CT-guided core FNAC, then the fixation time should not be beyond 6 to 12 hours. However, if we are talking about a resection sample, then sample fixation timings of up to 48 hours are acceptable. Also, it is equally important to ensure that we preserve as much of the tissue for further biomarker testing. And hence, towards this, it is important that we do not load the FFP sample on the microtome too many number of times. So typically what we tend to do here in our laboratory is that when we have the FFP sample, we load it onto the microtome. And when we are cutting out sections for a histopathology analysis, at that time itself, we take out extra slides and keep with us for further biomarker testing. This ensures that we do not lose out any tissue during the pruning procedure. Next, I'm going to touch upon the importance of choosing the right testing kits and testing protocols. So the limit of detection here is extremely important because it is very, very intimately tied up with what is the percentage of tumor cells that are present in the tissue that we have. We all know that there is bound to be tumor cell heterogeneity in the tissue. And so if we have at least 30% tumor cells, then we can directly go ahead for testing. Otherwise, tumor cell enrichment is important to ensure that we do not land up with any false negative. There are different platforms available, starting right from Roche, QIAGEN, Bio-Rad, ddPCR, further on to next generation sequencing testing. However, the minimum requirement still remains that we must cover exons 18, 19, 20, and 21 for EGFR testing. For most of the ARMS PCR-based kits that are available, the limit of detection is ranges from about 0.5 to 2% of tumor cell content, which is fantastically good, so long as we know that during the tissue processing procedures or the fixation, the DNA has not been compromised. So very important that the tissue fixation must be as per the protocol described, which is 10% neutral buffered formalin. The fixation time ideally should not be more than 48 hours. And those are really the most important things to remember so far as submitting a sample for EGFR testing is concerned. Many of these kits are already FDA approved. Amongst these are the Roche and QIAGEN. The Roche kit can be used not only for the tissue, but also for the plasma specimen. This again is what is reiterated by NCCN, that molecular testing for EGFR should be performed on the diagnostic biopsy or the post-surgical resection sample itself, to ensure that these results are made available to the clinician for further management of the patient as early as possible. In the reporting format, the laboratory must ensure to talk about which is the specimen that was used, what were the mutations that were looked at, whether any mutation was identified or not, what was the nature of the mutation, whether it was an activating or a deactivating mutation, in which exon was it seen, and very important also to mention that what is the analytical sensitivity of the methodology that was used. This is important because there are still some laboratories which are using Sanger sequencing, which has quite a bit compromised analytical sensitivity. So using Sanger sequencing, until and unless the mutation is present in about 18 to 20% of the tumor cells, you would not return a positive result. Whereas using a technology such as ARMS PCR or ddPCR, even if the mutation is present in about 1 to 2% of the tumor cells, one can have a clear positive answer. Challenges, of course, still remain, as in any field. There is an unmet need if there is very limited tumor sample available. So for that, one has to either increase the scope of technologies being used, such as NGS, or increase the scope of the samples that can be used, whether it is the cytology slides itself or the circulating tumor DNA from plasma. So what I would like to end my talk with is that as per guidelines, all non-small cell lung cancer adenocarcinoma patients must be tested for biomarkers, and especially so for EGFR mutations. The tumor tissue is really the gold standard for successful EGFR mutation testing. And as far as possible, this is the sample that one should be doing the biomarker testing on. And ARMS PCR gives a fantastically great analytical sensitivity for testing of EGFR mutation analysis. And EGFR mutation is recommended to be performed on the diagnostic specimen, whether the CT-guided core biopsy sample or the resected samples in early stage lung cancer patients, so that adequate adjuvant treatment decisions can be taken by the clinician for patient management. Thank you. This is where I would like to end.
Thank you, Dr. Sarjana, madam. I think it was a wonderful presentation. And you have given us very important information about the amount of tissue required for this genetic testing. And from your talk, it looks like the role of immunohistochemistry is gradually getting limited, especially in lung cancer.
Yes, it is. So, I mean, if the decision can be taken at the stage of the histopathology analysis itself, then one doesn't really need to do any sort of IHC testing at all for the biomarker staging itself.
So thank you, madam. And I think we'll have, I would now request you to join as a panelist to the presentation, to the panel discussion, which will be conducted by Dr. Rajesh Mistry. I don't need to really introduce Dr. Rajesh Mistry, who is a surgical oncologist in Kokilaben Hospital, Mumbai. He's an eminent surgical oncologist of the nation, and the whole of the Indian Association of Surgical Oncology knows him. The other panelists along for him are, one is Dr. M.V. Chandrakant, who's a medical oncologist from NH Super Specialty Hospital, Kolkata. The surgical oncologists are Dr. Shivam Jain, a surgical oncologist from Max Hospital, Delhi. Dr. Anil Herur, surgical oncologist from the Fortis Hospital, Mumbai. And Dr. Sarvana Rajamanikam, surgical oncologist from SPMM Hospital, Salem. We also have a radiation oncologist, Srinivas Jilukuri, from Apollo Hospital, Chennai. And we have a pulmonologist, Dr. B.R. Pattabi Raman, from KMCH, Coimbatore. And of course, we also have Dr. Savita Jivnani, madam, from Tata Memorial Hospital, who will be looked as an expert to assist all of them. So, Dr. Rajesh Mistry, sir, over to you, sir.
Hello.
I also request all the panelists and participants to post their questions in either the Q&A part or in the chat sessions.
So thank you, Sharad. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are clear.
So can I go ahead with sharing of the screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Where is it? Yeah. Is it visible now? The slides, are they visible? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so thank you, Sharad, and I welcome all the panelists. We're going to have an MDT on 3 lung cancer cases, and we'll see how we go about discussing the cases as they occur. Now, before I really go into that, these are the panelists who have been introduced by Sharad. I want to start with a very basic question. What is an early stage lung cancer? And I think I'll ask Anil, to define what an early stage lung cancer would be. Anil, are you there?
So, good evening, and thank you, ISO, for this wonderful panel discussion on lung cancer. So an early stage lung cancer is something that would obviously stage wise it is it would be T1 T2 lesions, N1, and basically resectable lung cancer is where I will put it as an early lung cancer, non-metastatic.
Right, Anil. So that's what I wanted to actually highlight. Like N2 may be a relatively advanced localized lung cancer, regionally advanced lung cancer. But for purpose of discussion, I think we should include all surgically resectable cancers as early stage lung cancer for this purpose, for the MDT. And I'm going to straight away go on to case number 1, which is a 45-year-old male presented with cough and hemoptysis of 3 to 4 months duration. Patient was a non-smoker and there were no known comorbidities. This is the chest X-ray, which shows you this kind of a lesion in the upper zone of the left lung. And if you look at the lung windows, lobulated mass, which is in the medial segment of the left lung upper lobe. And for purpose of discussion, we would say that the size of the tumor is approximately 4 centimeter plus. This is the mediastinal window with the primary and this is the PET scan. I'm not going to waste time on whether this is needed or that is needed, because these are all standard investigations which would be required for any patient to be evaluated for lung cancer. So this is a PET CT scan, and you will have to take my word that the mediastinum, rest of the mediastinum was also negative on PET scan. And the CT guided biopsy from the tumor was adenocarcinoma. So how do we proceed now? Since this is an operable looking lung cancer, I think I would like to start with surgeons. Is Shubham there?
Yes, sir.
Hello, Shubham.
Hi, sir. Good
Sarvana
evening.
is there? Yeah, please, you can actually answer the question. How do we proceed? MDT, we have this presentation made by a resident, and now they're asking you as to what is to be done.
So pulmonary function with the DLCO would be in order to first assess for the fitness for treatment for this patient, I feel.
Yeah, all that, I think these are standard things. Let us go straight to the treatment part, apart from the standard routine investigations.
So I think this
for any...
this patient would benefit from a surgery if the mediastinal evaluation has been negative, as you said.
So that is the question I wanted to ask. Like, you have a negative mediastinum on PET CT scan. The tumor is about 4 centimeters. So would you still want to do a mediastinal staging, or you would straight away proceed with surgery?
So the mediastinal staging can be done during the surgery as the part before the surgery. So I would proceed with that plan. If on table on mediastinoscopy, notes turn out to be positive, then probably neoadjuvant chemotherapy would be in order for this patient.
Sabita, would you like to differ? Since, hello, is Sabita there?
Yes, I'm here. We would do an EBUS, sir.
Right.
Primarily because of the size, because it's more than 3 centimeters, relatively central. So we would do an EBUS first. If that's negative, then proceed for surgery.
Very right. So we now bring in a pulmonologist, Dr. Raman. If we have to do a mediastinal staging, what would be, your choice? You just do an EBUS, or you would like to do EBUS along with US in this particular case?
Hello,
Dr. Raman there?
I mean, the lesion. Hello? Yeah. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, yes.
Sir, I'll make you a co-host, sir. You can switch on your videos.
So the question is whether, you can, you need to do only an EBUS or EUS. Is that?
Yeah, because we all kind of agree that mediastinal staging should be done in view of the large size of the tumor.
Yes, sir. EBUS TBNA would be the first.
Yeah, so the other question I have, for complete mediastinal staging, you would want to do, I guess, EBUS along with EUS, isn't it? I think the connection
is... Yes, sir. Usually what we do is we use what is called as the EUS-BFNA.
Right.
We do a EBUS into the esophagus. And
so the next question that...
BFNA is what we do.
Yeah,
so that will complete the mediastinal staging.
The next question that comes to my mind is, if you have seen the CT scan and the PET CT scan, there are hardly any nodes, of any size seen in the mediastinum. So what is the field rate of EBUS and EUS when you do mediastinal staging in this setting?
Sir, it's about less than 10%. It's about 6% in one of the studies which was done in Germany.
Right. So that's what my, chest physicians tell me, that if the lymph nodes are not really seen on CT scan, they would have very small lymph nodes which are not, easily accessible for FNA or a biopsy. So I wonder whether that should be really necessary if you have clear mediastinum on imaging, but that is something we can keep debating. These are just some theoretical... yes, you have anything to say us? Okay, so this is a bit of theory mediastinal staging necessary.
I agree with you, sir. I agree with you, sir.
Yeah, there is some time lag.
So notes we can do TBNA and we'll stop there. Rest of it will be the surgeon.
Right, that's right. So this...
I'm sorry about the connection. I think there is something wrong with my connection.
Right. Anyway, we'll manage. Yeah. So, just a little bit of theory, mediastinal staging, when should it be done for all T2, T3 lesions, irrespective of the PET CT scan findings, central tumors or tumors with, which are poorly differentiated, which are more likely to metastasize, and not required if the tumor is really very small or peripheral. You can straight away proceed if the PET is negative. And combination of EBUS and EUS is better. And in this particular patient, the question that also needs to be discussed before we actually proceed with definitive treatment, would a brain MRI be required? And maybe Shubham, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, please.
So I would ask for an MRI brain for this patient.
Would a brain?
Yeah, MRI brain.
Actually,
so
can I add a point? Actually, if we had the biopsy, adeno, there's a high chance that the adenocarcinomas, have a chance of propensity to have brain mets. So even in stage 1 lung cancer, I think if you have a biopsy, it's sensible to do an MRI before you plan for treatment.
Okay, I mean, no debate on that. But if you really have a, T1 tumor, T1A tumor,
T1
peripheral,
not an issue.
Irrespective of the histology, it should not be really necessary. So, routinely you would do this test to decide about the medical and cardiopulmonary fitness for surgery. But before we jump on to that, what are the treatment options available and what would be the ideal treatment? So, Dr. Saravana, you can actually address that.
Yeah, so as of now, in the current standards as well as all guidelines suggest that if the patient is a candidate for surgery for the treatment of early lung cancer still remains a gold standard for cancer. And in such a situation like the scan image that you showed, a lobectomy is the minimum procedure that has to be done along with the systematic lymphadenectomy.
Okay, so the other option for localized cancer would be
So in case we had a smaller lesion, then probably we could have debated on doing either sublobar section in surgery or SBRT or SRS or radio guided surgery for smaller lung lesions.
But let's ask the radiation oncologist, would he like to radiate this patient if the patient is medically fit, which was the case in this patient? Dr. Srinivas, are you there?
Yes, sir. Good evening, everyone. I mean, it's a fairly large lesion, and I would not be keen to jump on this lesion and do an SBRT, especially if the patient is medically operable. I would definitely prefer surgery.
So that's a good point, yeah. Yes. So this patient had mediastinoscopy. Those days we didn't do EBUS and EUS and all that. So the biopsy of the mediastinal lymph node was granulomatous lymphadenitis. So we proceeded with lobectomy with mediastinal lymph node dissection using the VATS technique, which was demonstrated by Dr. Sabita. And the final histopathology was adenocarcinoma, T size 4.2, margins were free, no lymphovascular emboli, and nodes were negative, mediastinal as well as hilar. So now, what next? What would you do? Apart from the histology, the question that I had wanted to ask, particularly medical oncologists, is there any need for doing molecular study on this patient?
Yes,
Dr. Chandrakant.
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir. So now that we always had a data that if the size is more than 4 centimeter, we must offer adjuvant systemic chemotherapy. We also had a meta-analysis on that.
Right.
Now that we have a molecular trial, the initial drugs like Geftinib and all did fail, but now we have a very potent systemic therapy for the EGFR mutant. So I think any size more than 3 centimeters, even node negative patients, I would consider at least a EGFR testing at this point of time, so that I can offer adequate systemic therapy. Even osimertinib has been approved in this particular scenario.
Right. So you don't think ALK, ROS, and PDL1 is necessary for this patient?
So, as of now, we don't have any data on this, sir. Once the data is mature, I think they're about to come. So, I think if a drug has to provide any benefit in the adjuvant setting,
Right.
the drug has to be really effective. Borderline benefits all wash away with adjuvant clinical trials. So, if a drug is really effective, it's effective in adjuvant setting. So, I think we have osimertinib that has shown OS benefit in the metastatic setting, and now it is even coming up in the adjuvant setting. So, I mean, it's all about how efficacious systemic therapy is all about. So, I think we must offer EGFR as of now. PDL1, other molecular test yet to be answered, sir.
Okay, so provided this patient was EGFR mutation negative, what would be the adjuvant treatment?
So, this patient needs adjuvant chemotherapy because 4 centimeter, the magic number is what we have kept. So, cisplatin vinorelbine and pemetrexed cisplatin are both options in a adenocarcinoma.
Yes.
So I would prefer pemetrexed cisplatin in this patient because of the ease of tolerance. This patient is just a lobectomy. Maybe I would get away with cis vinorelbine also, even though only 60% of patients could go and complete the actual number of cycles. So cis vinorelbine or pemetrexed cisplatin are equivalent effective in this setting, sir.
And how many cycles? Four
cycles, sir.
And if this patient had mutation like Manish presented, he should be also considered for osimertinib subsequent to chemotherapy, right?
So no chemo. If there is mutation, osimertinib straight.
Yeah, I'm saying in case there's patient tumor was showing mutation positivity, in addition to chemo, you would also want to consider osimertinib.
Sir, if mutation, I will give only osimertinib.
You don't have the...
Yes, sir. Mutation only...
You won't give chemotherapy at all?
No, sir.
Straight away, just osimertinib?
Osimertinib. Yes, sir.
Okay. But, today, the standard of care, before this trial came in was to have adjuvant chemotherapy.
Correct.
And also the ADURA trial had mix of both chemotherapy plus osimertinib. So I wouldn't be very certain about, just dealing the patients with osimertinib alone. Till we have more mature and more trials to show us that osimertinib or TKIs are going to be useful in adjuvant setting. So what you said is absolutely right. Chemotherapy for high-risk patients or osimertinib, one of the two, is necessary when you have a patient with T2N0 cancer. Okay, so now we move on to case number 2. This is a 72-year-old male patient investigated for hemoptysis, chronic smoker for 30 years, all possible comorbidities with history of CABG in past. And this is the PET CT scan of that patient, a largest tumor in the left lung, again peripherally situated. And the routine investigations were normal, but you can see that the pulmonary function test is not really very good with DLCO of just about 42%. I don't know whether you can read that. And the biopsy was adenocarcinoma. So what would be the treatment options here? Sabita, would you want to do something with your VATS, Uniportal?
Sir, can I see the PFT again? Sorry, sir.
Yeah, please. So the FEV1 is 0.91 and the DLCO, I don't think you can read, but it is about 42 or 43%, if I remember right.
Yes, and he also has full IHT and ejection fraction of 45%. So, sir, this patient...
Yeah, all possible comorbidities.
Yeah, he should be evaluated further. I mean, he would definitely need a stress echo and some other functional evaluation of the PFT. A good combined test would be CPET, cardiopulmonary testing, if he can perform it. So he would definitely need further evaluation if we are thinking of surgery. And we should also counsel him regarding a non-surgical option because he would be high risk.
Yeah. So would you be really keen on going through all the tests in view of, the setting which I have kept? It's like patient is really cardiopulmonary status is really very compromised. But even then, would you want to think about surgery when you have an alternative available, which I'm sure Dr. Srinivas is going to touch upon?
So there is no head-to-head comparison to show that radiation can offer a better survival. At present, surgery still offers the best survival. So this is what you have to explain to the patient and then explain the risks also.
Okay, in spite of the randomized trial of 30 or 40 odd patients, yeah?
So 30 or 40 odd patients, we can't use that randomized control trial.
Okay, so now...
It was not powered, sir, and definitely does not conclusive.
Yeah, what will Srinivas have to say about this patient?
Yeah, there are at least two things which I know. If the patient is is sent to me by the surgeon, I would definitely tell the patient that the risk of toxicity with SBRT is very minimal. I would still allow, or I would request or suggest the surgeon to do whatever evaluation is required, because again, this is a largish tumor. Right. And there is a chance that mediastinal nodes could come positive. This again, it's a peripheral lesion, so it's not even central. So I would say that the toxicity with SBRT would be minimal. Right. And if the mediastinum is indeed negative, and if we can do some kind of a mediastinal staging with broncho and EBUS TBNA, even it is indeed negative, then definitely I would offer SBRT for this patient, and mentioning that the toxicity is limited. And whatever data we have, of course, we don't have a robust head-to-head comparison, as Dr. Sabita mentioned, which I would agree, and the data has to be taken with a lot of caution. But nevertheless, the data is good enough to suggest that SBRT is probably at least good in short term. Right. And I would say that there is enough data to at least recommend SBRT to him in case he's not operable.
So Srinivas, I really like you because the view you took is really balanced, as opposed to our radiation oncologists who are ready always to, treat with radiation therapy. But taking everything into consideration, we decided to offer this patient SBR. So this is post SABR PET CT scan. So you can see that there is residual uptake and soft tissue there. So, this is almost like 1 year after, no, not 1 year, immediately after radiation therapy. So what would you do with this situation after you have given your SABR?
Yes, so it is a bit tricky to assess responses after SABR or SBRT, or I would like to call it more extreme hypofractionation rather than SBRT or SABR. But nevertheless, it is a bit tricky to assess response even with the use of a PET. After an adequate doses of SABR, the chances of in-field failures are really rare. Less than 5%. So I would not jump on it and say and label it as a progression or a residual disease or a recurrence so soon. And I would still follow up this patient for, especially if the patient is not really symptomatic or not progressed at any other site, then I would definitely put him under radiological surveillance for a bit longer period.
Yeah. So, like this tumor, as we discussed, slightly largish. And if we were to say that it was 4 centimeter, you have given SABR, would you want to consider some form of adjuvant treatment? Maybe Manish, if he is there, he can throw light on this, or maybe Dr. Chandrakant can take the question.
Yes, sir. So the baseline size of the tumor was more than 4 centimeters.
Yeah, 4 centimeter plus.
Okay, so then this patient will require systemic therapy, irrespective of the response. So I would prefer giving systemic therapy for this patient, just like the way I did post-surgery. I know the evidence is not that great, but if you cannot get, surgery gets a R0, SABR does a R0, that's not sure. So I would prefer to put some adjuvant therapy.
Okay. And if it was EGFR mutation positive, then the choice
only
would be easier.
Only osimertinib.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so this patient did not receive any adjuvant therapy, and 1 year down the line, this is what happened. So, there is local recurrence. It's not that surgeons never fail, but SBRT can, fail. But I would say 1 year is a reasonably good time, isn't it, Srinivas?
Yes, sir. I would agree. As I said, as you rightly said, that recurrences are known. They are less than 5%, especially if you have given adequate doses, more than 100 BED. The local recurrences are unusual. If you are a bit stingy with your dose in the upfront,
Right.
you would end up seeing a higher rate of local recurrences. So I mean, this is a typical candidate where I would give 12 into 5, which is equivalent to 120 gray BED. Unusual local recurrence, but obviously it is definitely looking like a local recurrence. And 1 year, as you rightly said, is a big enough period to consider that it could be a recurrence. Of course, it needs further evaluation, probably a biopsy if possible.
Right. I'll just like to, clarify that I have not involved Sarjana because tissue is always an issue. But when we are, operating on a patient, there is no problem getting adequate tissue. So please pardon me about that. Okay, last case, we don't have time. So this is a 62-year-old male hypertensive, was treated for shortness of breath and cough. And to cut the story short, I'm just going to show you the PET CT scan. Again, an FDG-avid mass in the right lung upper lobe, central, with mediastinal and hilar lymph node fairly large. So would you, Anil, would you want to do a mediastinal staging in this patient?
So in this patient, it is an obviously positive mediastinal node. I would probably skip on the on a mediastinoscopy or an EBUS.
Right. So, Sarvana, how would you proceed now? This patient. Hello.
Yeah. So this, you can see that the main PA is totally, almost nearly more than 60% engulfed by the lymph node over there. So it is going to be at this point a pneumonectomy. And in such situations, usually I take a call of trying to get, if I have a good biopsy and tissue, try to put this patient on some form of neoadjuvant therapy before going in for surgery.
So we have a biopsy which was adenocarcinoma, but the thing that I would like to ask you is, would you put this patient as an N2 which is resectable potentially, or something that should be treated with definitive chemoradiation therapy, thinking that the tumor, the nodal mass is quite bulky?
No, actually, this is this is actually an N1 node, the node which is lighting up over there. It's not N2. It's actually just at or beyond the takeoff of the first lobar bronchus. That is an N2 node.
That's what. But
that is an N2 node. The large one, which is actually compressing the PA, is actually an N1 node. So
that is right. That's right. But this patient is obviously not going to go in for per primum surgery, I guess.
Yeah,
right?
not per primum surgery. Yeah.
So at this point in time, if it is an MDT, would you want to say that this patient could potentially be a candidate for surgery, or would you want to say that no, this patient will not have surgery? And because we have the option of definitive chemoradiation therapy when you feel that the N2 disease is not going to be resectable.
If that node was the only node in the N2 region, I still would consider this as resectable. I think it's non-bulky, have a plaque-like appearance, and I'm very sure that if you give the proper chemotherapy, you will have downstaging and it is resectable. So I don't see a reason for not offering surgery in this patient.
Right. Okay. So biopsy was adenocarcinoma, and like I said, the options were whether consider definitive chemoradiation therapy or to go in for pre-op neoadjuvant therapy, which could be what. So this patient had reasonably good lung function test. The ejection fraction wasn't great. Biopsy was adenocarcinoma. And this patient received the neoadjuvant chemotherapy. Those days we were not, even now I'm not very, I don't really go in for pre-op chemoradiation therapy, just chemotherapy. And as you can see, there is significant response. The hilar lymph node is almost disappeared. Even the N2 lymph node is small in size, though still very active. So this patient, I would like to ask Dr. Minish, is he there?
Sir, Minish is left.
Yeah, Chandrakant, what would you, if preoperative chemotherapy had to be given, what combination would you give? And how many chemotherapies would you like to give?
So I believe that, sir, we must make this patient eligible for surgery, and that's the only way the patient can have a long-term life. So giving adequate chemotherapy is important, but I saw the ejection fraction is around 35%. So I would, if you want to get a best response, cisplatin should be the way to go. Carboplatin has marginally less response rates when compared to cisplatin. So I would have loved to put cisplatin in place. Right. But however, because of ejection fraction, I cannot give that much amount of hydration. I will use, in this situation, I will use a weekly taxane platinum, weekly paclitaxel and carboplatin regimen for 4 to 6 weeks and not beyond that.
So for sake of discussion, let's say that the heart was normal, ejection fraction wasn't a problem. Would you like to consider immunotherapy in this patient, pre-op immunotherapy, because there are some data which are emerging showing excellent response to immunotherapy plus chemotherapy?
So very true, sir. Even we are seeing double the response rates when you put chemo immuno in combination in both the lung and head neck cancers. I totally agree, but off-label I cannot say, sir, because there is no such evidence as of now. It looks good if I can put pembrolizumab plus pemetrexed plus cisplatin in this particular patient because it shows best response rates. But as of now, sir, if you look into evidence, it's about pemetrexed cisplatin for 3 to 4 cycles.
Right. And Sabita, have we done any resections post immunotherapy as induction therapy?
No, sir, we haven't done so far. We have written up a study along with the oncologist, but not started.
Okay. So, in one of the conferences I was, again, these were anecdotal, not too many cases, but patients who had induction with immunotherapy and chemotherapy, few of them landed up with unexplained pneumonia and a lot of pulmonary complications. So before we get into that, one should be very clear as to, what is the morbidity associated with the immunotherapy when it is given in a pre-operative setting.
So actually, even in ESTS and World Congress of Lung Cancer, when the surgeons were talking about operating after neoadjuvant immunotherapy, they complained about a lot of hilar fibrosis and difficulties in lymphadenectomy. So they said the major response is associated with a lot of fibrosis. And in the MSKCC study, I think they had almost 40% conversion from batch to open.
Yes. Okay. So we have discussed the treatment options, and this patient went in for surgery. And like this says that if you have to give pre-op chemotherapy, pembrolizumab, but if the patient was on definitive chemo radiation therapy, post chemo radiation therapy would be on maintenance durvalumab, isn't it, Chandrakant?
Yes, sir, definitely.
Right. Okay, he went through surgery, right upper lobectomy plus mediastinal lymph node dissection. There were residual lymph nodes which we could resect completely, and the perioperative recovery was uneventful. And this is the final histopath report: residual disease, tumor showing papillary morphology, lymphovascular emboli plus, margins were free. 2 mediastinals had positive metastasis, and other nodes were negative. So, Shubham, would you like to do something else in addition to this, since the recovery was uneventful and patient did well in the post-op period?
Sir, the nodes are still therapy. The nodes are still positive despite the good response.
Right.
I would definitely want to discuss with my radiation oncology colleague and medical oncology colleagues if something needs to be done further about it.
Yeah, so we can bring in Srinivas. is it an ideal case for post-op radiation therapy, at least to the mediastinum, in view of the pre-chemotherapy status of the lymph nodes on PET scan and residual disease seen in the lymph nodes?
Sir, I mean, there is some data that post-operative radiation therapy could be used in multi-station N2 disease. This, I am not sure whether we can really call this as strictly multi-station N2, but and apart from multi-station N2, margin positive disease you could probably give. And there is a recent randomized trial presented at ESMO,
right,
and which showed that there are very, very few patients who would benefit from it. I mean, there is definitely less number of mediastinal relapses in patients who received the post-operative radiotherapy, but overall survival was actually detrimental.
Okay.
So I would not be keen to offer post-operative RT in all patients, especially in this kind of a borderline patient where ejection fraction is also very low. The main issue with radiation is increase in cardiovascular mortality. And the trial showed that nearly 11% of patients who received chemotherapy and radiation therapy had cardiovascular mortality, deaths related to cardiovascular mortality. So I would not probably offer this patient post-operative RT unless it's, extensive N2, probably yes, but not in this patient where just 2 nodes are positive.
Right. Anil, what would you do in your practice? Anil?
Sir, I would
definitely
consider for. Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes.
I think some adjuvant chemotherapy will be required. Adjuvant radiation, I'm not so sure whether it will benefit him in spite of having a positive mediastinum.
Okay, so this is an issue which is unresolved, and we need more trials addressing post-op treatment for patients who had surgery following induction treatment, whether it is chemo or radiation therapy. Okay, so with that, I conclude the MTD, and we can all probably retire and have dinner. But before that, I would like to hand it over to Sharath for concluding remarks. Yeah.
Thank you.
To all the panelists.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I must thank you, Dr. Rajesh Mistry, for conducting a wonderful session. I don't mind, but over the last 2 webinars which I have seen, I am noticing that with a long career of around 22 years after I passed my MCH, lung cancer is one such disease which has tremendously changed over these years. Compared to all other organs, the youngsters are far better knowledge, have a better knowledge, and very, very highly skilled. Skills have changed. Everything has changed. The lung surgery has changed, the radiation therapy, and the chemotherapy, of course, especially with the introduction of this new, has really changed. And I must thank Dr. Sabita for giving us a wonderful video presentation, Dr. Sarjana for her talk, Dr. Minish Jain, and also all the panelists, Dr. Shubham, Dr. Sarvana, Dr. Anil Lerur, Dr. Chandrakant, and Dr. Srinivas Chilukuri for participating in this session. Thank you all. Thank you, AstraZeneca's Dr. Mr. Srikanth and the whole team from AstraZeneca for giving us an opportunity to have a great webinar online. Thank you, everybody.
Sir, on behalf of AstraZeneca, I would like to thank you for all your support, sir, to you and IASO, sir. Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. It was very, very educative.
Thank you, Dr. Desai, Dr. Mistry, ISO, and my co-speakers.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Desai. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.